here on a beautiful night in Alberton, and I'm getting ready to go away for a couple weeks, but I thought I would just take a minute to address a couple of concerns that were brought up on one of my webinars that I had posted last week. And so I'm just going to go through some of these points and give you my input on what I think. So the first one that was brought up was it takes too long to get there. Basically living in Dewland. Like living in Dewland would be a great place, but it takes too long to get there. I have to disagree because, you know, I have videos that I've posted of Swagger's recall when he's being, you know, called off my adult dogs and he's only 4 months old. I've got videos of him doing a beautiful job retrieving when he's 3 months old. My agility dogs are in the ring competing when they're 18 months old. And that's not because I feel a need that they need to be there. It's because I feel that they're ready. The last 3 dogs I've competed in agility with, they've been there at 18 months of age. By the time they're 2, they are amongst the best or beating the best in North America. Feature, when she was 3, won her first, actually it was before her 3rd birthday that she won her first gold medal at a world championship. So I think there's this misconception that training in the Say Yes methodology or Dewland as you were takes a lot longer to get dogs to do things, and I have no idea where this idea came from, but it's just not true. I will tell you that if you switch over from a World of Corrections to one the way that I'm suggesting to train, it may take you longer the first dog that you train because you've got to consciously start to process exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And yes, that's going to take you longer to make those choices. They're not going to be innate to you. But once they become second nature, then it's not going to be a problem, and you will be able to roll right along and get things done, I think, faster, because you're not spending a lot of time retraining things. The dogs learn it, they learn it well, you move on, and you're just maintaining for the rest. The next question was about frustration, that I don't want my dogs to get frustrated while they're figuring out exactly what it is I want. 2 things. First of all, if you've seen people shaping when the dog seems incredibly frustrated, then my suggestion is that the environment hasn't been set up for success, because it should be pretty clear. The dog should be able to come up with the idea of exactly what's expected of them pretty quickly. However, yes, I do plan for frustration in my training. Frustration is a massively important part of learning. What the dog learns is persistence. They learn persistence through frustration. There was a great book, Abrams. Isn't that off? I should remember. It was called The Frustration Theory anyway. And then this fellow talked about the different things that come from frustration, and one of them is you could get shut down. So if you're not, it's a very good decision not to leave even though they're barking. You could get a dog that walks away and sniffs and leaves their work. That's why I like to control the level of frustration and invite frustration into my training at a very early age, because I want the dog to learn to be persistent. If you raise a dog and never allow them to be frustrated, you always use a lure to tell them exactly what you want, or light correction to say you don't want that, then comes a time when you're maybe working in agility and they don't get a sequence right once or twice or 3 times, they're going to give up. They're going to start sniffing, they're going to wander off, get the zoomies. Frustration is going to mean give up. And what I cultivate in my dogs, the way that you'll see in Puppy Peaks, the way that I train them, so I cultivate that frustration is something you work through, and it brings persistence, which is so critical to training. Okay, the next point. I do not want to get bit 300 times a day. A note, she, being me, does not mention how many days of ignoring the biting it took before the dog lost the behavior. We need to understand how it is that dogs learn, with 17 exclamation points after it. I'm pretty sure I've got a good handle on how dogs learn, and you've got to understand that Swagger here was an isolated case. He was a singleton, so I am going to get bit more because he didn't have litter mates to teach him that biting is inappropriate. By the time he was 7 or 8 weeks old, I really didn't get bit very much at all. I'm going to try and encourage him to bite me. So if I can get him to bite me, he basically puts his teeth don't even touch my hand anymore. So he's learned great inhibition, and he's learned that biting me isn't a good thing to do. You're such a good monkey, and you really would like to catch that fly, wouldn't you? Good boy. Encore and Feature, my border collies now, do not bite me when they get over aroused. And they've never been corrected for it. Buzzy and Stony, my first two border collies, I did, maybe not, yes, Buzzy, what I did with Buzzy for his biting is I managed it, and I hoped that it would go away, but it didn't. I actually had John make me this plastic, I called it the buzz deflector, and it was this amazing little tool. It was a PCV or a clear like plexiglass tube with a cover on the front, and I'd feed a tug toy through this tube, and it was, that was the cover, or it wasn't a cover, it was a guard. So it was like a sword handle, so Buzzy could see my hand and the tug toy going through my hand through this plastic handle, but if he'd go at my hand, he'd hit this guard. You know what, he never stopped biting me. I tried to manage that. I did yell ouch or all the traditional things with him. With Stony, I'd just grab her and smack her under the chin because she was one of the first dogs I ever trained. And those two dogs bit me their entire life when they'd go over the top and get aroused. And guess what? Encore and Feature, they have never bit me in an over-aroused state. So I'm thinking that the doing nothing is definitely working. The next point is, does she think puppies would teach their litter mates to stop biting by doing nothing? Does she think they learn to not trust or lack the desire to play because of the litter mate bit back? I did have a litter in 1994. I had a Jack Russell that had a singleton puppy, and it was a tiny male, 3 ounces. And a good friend of mine, had a litter of border collies born the same day, and she lent me one of her puppies, a great big bruising male, like 16-ounce male. And so Twister, my little Jack, raised these two puppies together. When these puppies were about 3 weeks old, the big bruiser border collie tried to play with this little Jack Russell, and he came down and he body slammed it. They pounced on the middle of his back, and the Jack Russell just curled up into this fetal position. And the border collie for 3 days would grab him by the scruff of the neck and shake him, trying to get him to play, and the Jack Russell would do nothing. I was actually concerned that I'd bred some sort of wimpy, wussy little Jack Russell that wouldn't, go back at him and wouldn't engage in play. But what was happening was that Jack Russell was shaping him to approach him in a more appropriate way. So around 3.5 days into this, when the puppies were between 3 and 4 weeks of age, the border collie was laying down on, I wish I'd got this on video because it was just such an awesome display. Border collie was laying down, and he went up to the Jack Russell and he just kind of pawed him a little bit with the paw, very lightly. Jack Russell did nothing for a little bit, and the border collie kept pawing at him. And sure enough, finally this Jack Russell took his paw and pawed back. And you can imagine what went on next. It didn't take long before the pawing turned to wrestling, and then they got to be great buds, and they played and played and played. So the rough biting was taught. The Jack Russell did teach the border collie not to do that by doing nothing. You know what? I'm not engaging with you. I'm not going to play with you. So one appropriate correction is all that is needed. The littermate bites back one time hard enough to change that behavior. All right, so the implication here is that one appropriate correction is all that is needed to change behavior. And I think any of you listening to this that has ever got 2 speeding tickets, you're living proof that one appropriate correction does not change behavior. If it does, then when your dog is pulling on a leash, you pop back once, you never have to do it again. The dog's behavior has been changed, one appropriate behavior. A dog who breaks a start line or a sit, stay, and obedience, one appropriate correction, and they'll never do it again. My understanding in the history that I've had with this is that's not the case. That you are going to need to live a life of following up correction after correction after correction. And potentially the incidences will get less, but Punishment can't actually teach anything. I don't care if you have an itch. You were doing something. Thank you. Punishment can't teach anything. Punishment can't grow behavior. Punishment can suppress behavior, and if it's violent enough, it can stop behavior, but the fallout with punishment grows with the severity of that punishment. So if you have something violent enough to stop behavior, then there's going to be some massive fallout with that correction that you doled out. Right? And you can see that Swagger doesn't really want to stay here. John's sitting over there. He wants to go visit John. But he's learning that, guess what, when I ask you to do something, you're going to have to stay there. And the response, when he tries to do something, I just stop the reinforcement. So the point is, this is how dogs learn, is what the poster is saying, that dogs learn through biting. And I don't necessarily know that I agree with that, because he had nobody to bite him, and he learned very nicely. I mean, he did get some visits with a lab litter, but he wasn't raised with a litter, and he learned through the 200 to 300 bites a day. That probably went on for maybe 4 or 5 days, maybe a week at the most. And I think the video clip with Swagger's interaction with my dogs shows you clearly what's learned through violence. That he's learned that he can trust some dogs in our household and he can't trust others. He's learned he can be himself around 1 or possibly 2 dogs, but he needs to be very guarded with 2 of the others. And that's not the kind of relationship that I want with my puppy. She being me, can get her dogs to come at home by managing to have a lot of acreage. So please don't punish me because I happen to live on a property that has a lot of acreage. And I really, really caution you to not let that be an excuse for you not to have a great recall, or for you to have to use punishment, because John and I have only lived here for about 10 years. So for a good chunk of my dog training life, I lived in the city. I lived in the city on a very busy road. Thank you. I worked on my recall. I lived in rough love, and guess what? I had phenomenal recalls on my dogs. My terriers back then, here's what I would do. Just a point, I never ever in my life ever lived in a house that had a fenced in backyard, so I would always go out with my dogs. Initially on leash, and eventually they just had such great focus for me that wasn't necessary. So here's what I would do. I would see a squirrel in the backyard. I'd get my 2, at the time, when I lived in the city, I had 2 female terriers, and I'd get them out the window. Oh, look, there's the squirrels. You see the squirrels? And I'd get them, that terrier scream, ah! I'd let them out in the backyard, and if it looked like they might be getting close to the squirrels, I'd say, come, and they'd turn on a dime and come back. That was a fun game for all of us. They loved it because I'd get them in this insane state of getting to chase the squirrels. Maybe the squirrels didn't love it too much, but I think they did because they got away. Never really pulled the squirrels. Never did I ever let my dogs get close enough to actually cause a threat to those squirrels. And it was great exercise to work on my recalls. You're doing a really good job there. So please, please, please don't use the excuse that I live on acreage, therefore that's why I have a great recall. If anything, I think it's harder because my dogs don't get to see the distractions here that when I lived in the city that my dogs got to see. So the next point, ignoring a self-rewarding behavior, biting, jumping, chasing the rabbit, will get you nowhere fast. Okay, I absolutely agree with this, that if you ignore a self-rewarding behavior, and I see this all the time with people trying to be positive, and they're outside of the ring, and they're letting the dog bark at the dog in the ring, and they're going to wait for it to stop so they can reward the dog. Quite honestly, what's going to happen is the dog's having so much enjoyment watching that they likely are never going to stop till the action stops. So I think the question here comes, how do you define self-rewarding? I personally don't think biting a person or jumping up on a person is self-rewarding. Like chasing a rabbit, the example that you gave here, absolutely, that's for self-rewarding. But the reinforcement a dog gets for jumping up or biting is a response from the human. Ow, get off! They're getting attention from the human. And by doing what I'm suggesting, ignoring that attention, ignoring that act, because that act isn't self-rewarding, ignoring them. So if I had a dog that jumped on me, I would just turn and face the wall. Assuming the dogs had tons of reinforcement for what it is you want them to do, which is sit when you greet people. And so then I turn back and they jump on me again, I turn and face the wall. Probably the third time I turn back, they would sit, because there's a history of reinforcement for exactly what it is you want to do. And then I would reward them for sitting, then I encourage them to try and jump on me, pushing that envelope, causing some frustration. And guess what? The dog's gonna learn not to jump. It doesn't need any more interaction from me, just reinforcement for what I want. The jumping up isn't the reinforcement, it's the response they get from the human, in most cases. So I hope that I've addressed all of the points that was brought up in that post, that living in do-land is a possibility. It takes some lateral thinking, it takes some work, and maybe takes some planning, but it absolutely, once you get the handle of how to do things, it shouldn't take you longer to train a dog. And I think the relationship that you develop with the dog, I didn't have any cookies, sorry pal. The relationship you develop with that dog is second to none. So that's it from Alberton on a Sunday night. Right, Mr. Waggy? That's a good boy. Break! I don't go monkey.